Welcome to our video series delving into one of Jesus' most profound and surprising teachings, the Olivet Discourse. In this video, we will examine the Abomination of Desolation, as outlined in Matthew 24:15-20. In the heart of Jesus' prophetic teaching on the Mount of Olives lies one of the most enigmatic warnings in all of Scripture, the Abomination of Desolation. Spoken of by the prophet Daniel and highlighted by Christ in the Olivet Discourse, this phrase has stirred centuries of debate, reflection, and anticipation. What did Jesus mean? When will it be fulfilled? And how should we respond? Stay tuned as we explore this mystery with fresh insight and biblical clarity. In the Olivet Discourse, Jesus cautioned his disciples about an event that would occur in Jerusalem, which would be so devastating and destructive that they should leave the city before it happened. Many early Christians did heed Jesus' warning in Matthew 24 about the Abomination of Desolation and fled Jerusalem before its destruction in AD 70. Jesus' prophecy, which references Daniel, warned that when believers saw the Abomination of Desolation standing in the holy place, they should flee to the mountains, Matthew 24:15-16. Many interpreted this as a sign of impending judgment on Jerusalem. According to early church historians, such as Eusebius of Caesarea, Christians in Jerusalem recognized these signs. They successfully escaped to a town called Pella, located in the Decapolis region across the Jordan River. This mass departure likely occurred around the time of the Jewish revolt against Rome, AD 66, just before the Roman siege intensified. In this video, we will examine what they witnessed, its significance, and why it was important. We are reading from the NASB.
Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are pregnant, and to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in the winter, or on a Sabbath, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short.
In Matthew 24:15, Jesus refers to the Abomination of Desolation, emphasizing its importance in the Olivet Discourse. He states, "So when you see standing in the holy place, the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand." This unique phrase acts as a prophetic spotlight, urging readers to pause and pay attention, urging discernment. Daniel references the Abomination of Desolation in three significant passages: Daniel 9:27, Daniel 11:31, and Daniel 12:11. Each of these passages reveals different historical and prophetic layers, so discernment is essential for understanding their context. Jesus' audience, particularly those familiar with Jewish apocalyptic literature, needed to determine which scenario he was signaling. Was he referring to a past typology, a near-future Roman desecration, or a distant end-time event? It's almost as if Jesus is saying, this is not a surface-level warning. You'll need to engage deeply with Daniel to understand what's coming. Given that the destruction of the temple is the context of this discussion, it makes sense that Jesus is referencing Daniel chapter 9. This chapter contains the only passage that explicitly prophesies the destruction of the temple by mentioning abominations, plural, that result in desolation. In verses 24-26, Daniel presents a timeline of 70 weeks. He predicts that after the arrival of the Anointed One, the people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. This passage is often interpreted as referring to the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in 70 CE. The Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE was a brutal and decisive chapter in the First Jewish-Roman War. Led by General Titus, Roman forces surrounded the city during Passover, trapping thousands of pilgrims inside and cutting off their supplies. Within Jerusalem, various Jewish factions were already in conflict, which weakened their defenses and depleted their resources. After months of intense fighting, the Romans breached the city walls and launched a final assault on the Temple Mount. The Second Temple was destroyed, a loss that echoes through Jewish history and is still mourned annually on Tisha B'Av. Tens of thousands were killed, enslaved, or displaced, and the city was systematically razed, leaving only a few towers standing as grim reminders of its former glory. This event marked a turning point. Not only did it signify the end of the revolt, but it also initiated a long period of exile and transformation in Jewish religious life. During the Roman-Jewish Wars, particularly the Siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE, there is no clear historical record of an individual standing in the holy place as described by Jesus in Matthew 24:15. However, the temple precincts were violently breached by Roman forces, resulting in the desecration of the sacred space in a broader sense. Historical accounts, especially those from Josephus, indicate that the Zealot factions had already defiled the temple before the Romans arrived, using it as a base for their internal conflicts. When the Romans eventually stormed the Temple Mount, they set fire to the sanctuary, looted its treasures, and paraded sacred items, such as the menorah, in their victory procession. While no single figure is noted as standing in the holy place symbolically or prophetically, the combined actions of rebels and Roman soldiers, from acts of sacrilege to outright destruction, fulfilled the desecration that both Daniel and Jesus warned about. It represented a tragic convergence of political rebellion and divine judgment. It is important to note that in Luke's Gospel, Jesus provides a clarification regarding the need for his disciples to leave Jerusalem before the armies surrounded it. Luke's account adds a significant layer of detail to Jesus' warning. In Luke 21:20-21, Jesus states, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city." This differs from the accounts in Matthew and Mark, which refer more generally to the Abomination of Desolation. Luke's version is often interpreted as a more immediate and practical warning, likely directed at the first-century audience who had experienced the Roman siege of Jerusalem in AD 70. This serves as evidence that Jesus was focused on the destruction of the temple rather than merely its desecration. The woes in Matthew 23 and the warnings in the Olivet Discourse form a powerful thematic bridge. In Matthew 23, Jesus delivers a scathing rebuke to the religious leaders, calling out their hypocrisy, blindness, and failure to faithfully shepherd Israel. He ends with a lament. "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I have longed to gather your children together, but you were not willing." Matthew 23:37. This lament flows directly into the disciples' astonishment at the temple, Matthew 24:1, prompting Jesus' prophecy of its destruction. Scholars often see this as a literary and theological hinge. Matthew 23:13-36. The woes expose the spiritual corruption of the leaders. Matthew 23:37-39. Jesus mourns Jerusalem's rejection and foretells its desolation. Matthew 24:1-2. Jesus declares the temple will be torn down. Matthew 24:3 onward. The Olivet Discourse unfolds, explaining the consequences and cosmic scope of that rejection. Some scholars argue that the judgment on Jerusalem is not just political or military. It's covenantal, a response to generations of resistance to God's messengers. That's why Luke's version, with its emphasis on fleeing the city when surrounded by armies, feels like a direct outworking of the grief and warning Jesus expressed in Matthew 23. To fully understand Jesus' prediction, we will turn to the 9th chapter of Daniel to make a couple of observations.
Then, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined, and he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate.
Many Christian interpreters view Daniel 9:26 as a prophetic reference to Jesus. The verse states, "After the 62 weeks, the Anointed One will be cut off and will have nothing." The term Anointed One, Hebrew Mashiach, is commonly translated as Messiah, and the phrase cut off is interpreted to mean a violent death or removal. This aligns with the crucifixion. Jesus, the promised Messiah, was rejected and executed, seemingly stripped of power and support. Yet from a theological perspective, this cutting off was the very means by which redemption was accomplished. The verse continues with a prediction that the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, interpreted by many as the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 CE. Many scholars and interpreters identify Titus, the Roman general who led the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE, as the prince who is to come. Titus was called a prince in part because he was the son of Emperor Vespasian, who became emperor during the chaos of the Roman Civil War in the late 60s CE. While Titus himself wasn't officially emperor at the time of the Jerusalem siege in 70 CE, he was a commanding general with imperial authority, and his position as heir apparent gave him the status of prince in both political and prophetic terms. In Daniel 9:27, the phrase, "On the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate," suggests a tipping point, a culmination of offenses that triggers divine judgment. If we understand the crucifixion of Jesus as the ultimate rejection of God's anointed, then it could be seen as the moment when the abominations reach their full spread or wing. Not just a single act, but the final crescendo of covenantal betrayal. The Messiah cut off, unjustly condemned, and crucified outside the holy city. From this perspective, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE becomes not merely a geopolitical tragedy, but a theological reckoning, a judgment that follows the rejection of the covenant's fulfillment. This view echoes themes in the Gospels and Acts, where the apostles warn that rejecting Christ has consequences not just for individuals, but for the nation's spiritual trajectory. Given that Daniel is predicting a buildup of covenantal offenses culminating in judgment, the crucifixion of the Messiah becomes the ultimate transgression, the moment when Israel's rejection of God's covenant reaches its tragic peak. It's not merely a political or judicial error, it's a spiritual rupture. The very one sent to fulfill the covenant is cut off, and in that act, the abominations reach their full spread, writ large across history. Paul the Apostle presents the crucifixion of Jesus Christ as Israel's ultimate transgression, noting that the crucifixion of Jesus was part of God's salvation plan all along. His insight in Romans 11:12 is both sobering and astonishing. He writes, "If their transgression means riches for the world, and their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater riches will their fullness bring?" This perspective frames Israel's rejection of Jesus as a paradoxical turning point, a national failure that opened the floodgates of grace to the nations. Paul also anticipates a restoration of Israel when he writes, "For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead?" God will reassemble the Jewish people back to the land and pour out His Spirit on them. Their rejection refers to Israel's widespread refusal to accept Jesus as Messiah. Reconciliation to the world points to how this opened the door for Gentiles to receive the gospel. Their acceptance anticipates a future moment when Israel, as a people, turns back to God. Finally, life from the dead is seen as a metaphor for spiritual revival, following a return from exile. We're building a space for honest, grace-filled discovery. If that sounds like something you want to be part of, subscribe and click the bell to stay connected. Thanks for watching.